when he heard that I was going to All India Radio and occasionally comparing pop music shows, he was like, "Pop music? You should check out the classical stuff." I did, and eventually that got better hold of me than the career dream I had of becoming a rock musician in a band. That kind of got relegated.
Welcome to This Week at the NCPA. Some stellar stuff that's happening in the autumn season. The Symphony Orchestra of India is blessed and privileged to have Maestro Zubin Mehta come in and conduct the orchestra for 2 separate shows. And the excitement is abuzz, alive. Now, just before those epic performances, on the 8th of August at 6 p.m., it might do you a world of good if you come in and listen to this eminent gentleman talk. It's a talk on Richard Strauss, the man and his music. 8th August at 6 p.m. This is the Jamshed Baba Theatre Museum. Now, the entry is free, but please note you must register at Book My Show because it's a limited seater venue. So they know how many people they can accommodate and accordingly close registrations. So please go on to Book My Show, register. 8th of August, 6 p.m. You'll find it in the listings. Richard Strauss, the man and his music. Dr. Anjan Ray will be in an interaction with Mr. Kushu Santuk, who is the chairman of the NCPA. And the idea is to take you through the fascinating world of Richard Strauss. And Richard Strauss's music will be performed by the Symphony Orchestra of India on the 24th and the 25th, and that is being conducted by Maestro Zubin Mehta. Dr. Ray holds a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Pennsylvania under the guidance of Nobel laureate Alan MacDiarmid. Have I got the pronunciation right?
Close enough.
Close enough. He's worked thereafter for 3 decades in the fields of cosmetics, healthcare, chemicals, energy, sustainability, and climate change. Throughout his career as a scientist engineer, he's remained engaged with the media and music as a radio presenter with All India Radio Delhi and Mumbai, as a columnist for the campus newspaper, the Daily Pennsylvanian at the University of Pennsylvania, and as a freelance journalist and feature writer with the Sunday Observer, the Times of India, and Gentleman Magazine. He's also served as faculty at my alma mater, the Xavier Institute of Communications in Mumbai. Hi, great to talk to you. How are you?
I'm always blessed. That never changes. In scientific terms, we say that's a constant.
Well, your love for classical music stems from your early exposure to Hindustani classical music. But when did you get interested in Western classical music so as to go on and host successful shows on All India Radio and now subsequently conduct music appreciation workshops and what you're doing at the Jamshed Baba Museum, which is a talk, a conversation on Strauss? When did that aspect of your life kick in?
Classical music grows on you. It's not something that happens overnight, but all classical music, Hindustani, Carnatic, Western, any formal music, starts with some training. I was very lucky. I learned to play the Jaltarang at an early age. I was in school, and my teacher was a gentleman called Jitendra Pratap, who was a disciple of Ustad Alauddin Khan Sahab. That's where it started. But he was extremely non-denominational. He loved music. And when he heard that I was going to All India Radio and occasionally comparing pop music shows, he was like, "Pop music? You should check out the classical stuff." I did, and eventually that got better hold of me than the career dream I had of becoming a rock musician in a band. That kind of got relegated.
That's quite fascinating, that nugget. I'm so glad you shared this with us. Talk to me about Richard Strauss. What is it that really draws you to his compositions? What is it that you find very exciting about him? A lot of these composers had very exciting lives. Some died very early, too early perhaps. Richard Strauss in particular, I leave the mic open to you.
So Richard Strauss, I'm using the German pronunciation because he was born in Munich. He was a child prodigy. He started at the age of 6. And unlike most musicians, there was this saying, "Whom the gods love died young." And there were people like Arriaga who died at 19. Strauss went on well into his 80s. In fact, his 2 horn concerti, these are like jugalbandis between a solo instrument and orchestra. That's what we call a concerto. So he wrote two horn concerti, one at the age of 20, one at the age of 80. And he lived through two world wars. He saw the entire transition from a newly united Germany under Count von Bismarck in the 1860s, all the way to the Second World War and the fall of the Reich in 1945. He saw the persecution of the Jews, the Holocaust. He was himself made quite unpopular when he had collaborated with Stefan Zweig, the great Austrian writer in the 1930s, and that fell foul of the Nazis. So he went through a very interesting and elaborate, complex life. He had a very rich marriage with a fiery soprano called Pauline, and they were married for 55 years, died about a year apart. He was, above all, if I had to think of a phrase for Richard Strauss to describe him, I'd say he was a thinking man's composer. So he had sort of two icons. One was Richard Wagner, the great grand composer who told stories in music with expansive operas like the Ring Cycle. And the other was Mozart, king of melody, gentle harmonies, child prodigy, started young, went out like a flash by the time he was 36, literally drove himself to his grave. And Strauss was somewhere in between. He had the workmanship of Wagner, but he had the creative genius of Mozart. And above all, I think he loved texture. This is a phrase I borrow from Maria Badstuer. She is coming in to do the rehearsals ahead of Maestro Zubin Mehta's performance with the SOI. And she has been a regular with the SOI last couple of seasons. She's a Danish conductor, highly reputed. So she uses this word texture a lot. And I thought that if I had to think of something to describe Strauss, I would say he was a thinking man's textured composer.
Remarkable, that description. A lot of people turn around and say he thought nothing of depicting the silverware on his breakfast table or the sheep in Don Quixote. I'd like you to comment on that.
So, first of all, I think he liked to depict things in music. There's broadly two kinds of music, right? In classical music, whether it's Hindustani or Western or Carnatic, you have the pure music. That's abstract. You know the grammar of music. You follow the grammar of music in the sounds that you hear. And the other is what Richard Strauss made his own, what I would call program music. Things where the music has a narrative. You can imagine things when you listen to it. So, in fact, one of the pieces that Maestro Mehta will conduct is something called A Hero's Life, Ein Heldenleben. And that's, he calls it a tone poem or a symphonic poem. But in a way, it's I would say like a 6-part symphony where he makes himself the centerpiece of the composition. And he was really panned for this. How can you write a piece with yourself as the protagonist? But he says the hero, the hero's adversaries, which by the way, he pans the critics in that particular section. The hero's companion, his wife, Pauline, sometimes flirtatious, sometimes serious, sometimes, as I said earlier, fiery. The hero's battlefield, his struggle to be an established composer. The hero's works of peace, and the hero's retreat from the world and fulfillment. So imagine, he's actually telling his own story the same way, whether it is in Don Quixote or whether it is in Don Juan. He uses objects and animals and things around him, windmills, for example. For everything, he assigns a musical motif. He builds it into a tale. And as long as you know the context, you can there's Don Quixote going after that windmill, and we know what's about to happen, right? Similarly, in Don Juan, eventually, he dies in a duel. So he uses a different Don Juan story from the one that we hear in many other versions. One of the, he borrows in that from an Italian poet, Austrian poet, Nicholas Lenau. And Nicholas Lenau's Don Juan is not a womanizer. It's a man in search of the ideal woman. So the treatment of the story is very different from, let's say, the Don Juan of Mozart, where he is an out-and-out seducer. It's an opera. Very different storyline. As I said, a thinking storyline, he gives you context, and then he expects you to hear the context and have the light bulbs go off in your head.
4 last songs. I'd like you to comment on that. I believe they were composed in 1948 when Richard Strauss was 84 years old and
Yes.
really had to push the limits of his subject matter to come up with 4 last songs.
So there is at least one story, we will never know whether it's real or apocryphal, that he and his wife Pauline, they were by that time in the twilight of their lives. And he had already composed an enormous amount of musical output, including close to 200 songs, many for the soprano voice, because Pauline was a soprano. And he liked her to have a first shot at critiquing the song before they could make it perfect, perhaps. So apparently they were sitting and watching a sunset. And this is how the story goes. And he thought to himself that maybe that's the way we describe ourselves as we go out. So he wrote these four beautiful songs, called them Spring, September, Sleep, and Sunset. And personally, my favorite is Sleep. Now that I'm wearied of the day, my ardent desire shall happily receive the starry night like a sleepy child. Almost shades of Van Gogh, who had, of course, been dead for almost 50 years by the time this was written.
My last question is about memorable performances that you've attended at the National Centre of Performing Arts, either at the Jamshid Baba or at the Tata Theatre or the Little Theatre, Godrej, any of those wonderful theatres, experimental theatres in the complex.
It's been so many years of memorable performances, almost one next to the other. So I don't want to play favorites here, but I can tell you my memorable performance of Zubin Mehta. And that was when I was in Philadelphia. I remember the day very well. It was 2nd August of 1988. That's, later on it was my daughter's birthday. That's why I remember the day. And that was the one time Zubin Mehta used to come in and guest conduct the Philadelphia Orchestra where I was doing my PhD. And I used to occasionally be an usher, though I never actually got to shake hands with him. But there, every year, when the orchestra was not playing in season, they played open air at the Man Music Center in Fairmount Park, which is one of the most beautiful city parks anywhere in the world. So Zubin Mehta played there. It was an all Mozart program, and maybe now he's doing an all Richard Strauss program. And I said Mozart is a inspiration for Strauss. So what I remember of that program was the Sinfonia Concertante of Mozart. Remember, a concerto is a jugalbandi between a solo and an orchestra. A Sinfonia Concertante is a friendly competition between two instruments and then the jugalbandi with the orchestra. So there was a violin, a viola, and an orchestra. Itzhak Perlman, Pinchas Zuckerman, Zubin Mehta conducting the Philadelphia Orchestra, open air, summer breezes, starry skies. The absolute finest program I've attended.
Wow. There you have it. We've just given you a precursor of what's to come. There's lots more when you actually get down to it. Dr. Anjan Ray, in an interaction with Chairman of the NCPA, Mr. Kushu N. Santuk, will take you through the fascinating world of Richard Strauss. It's 8th of August, 6 p.m. onwards at the Jamshid Baba Theatre Museum. Richard Strauss, the man and his music. You must register at Book My Show. Entry is free, but registration is absolutely essential. Thank you very, very much for your time. I look forward to meeting you in person very, very soon.
Same here, Hrishi. Thank you.
94.3 Radio 1.